얼마 전에 책 한 권을 소개받았는데 굉장히 흥미있고 유익한 책입니다. 책 제목이 아주 재미있고 독특해요. You bring the bagels, I will bring the gospel. 당신은 베이글을 갖고 오지만 나는 복음을 가져오겠소. 이런 뜻인 것 같습니다. 베이글 하면은 미국 사람들, 특히 뉴욕 사람들이 즐겨 먹는 빵이기도 하지만 또 더 재밌는 사실은 유대인들의 빵이라는 것이죠. 이 베이글과 기독교의 복음 어떤 관련이 있을까요? 굉장히 흥미를 갖고 책을 읽었는데 정말로 밤새도록 책을 손에서 놓지 못할 만큼 유대인에 대한 이 기독교인들이 가져야 될 여러 가지 조심해야 될 것들, 그리고 정서적 차이, 이런 것들을 잘 설명해 놓은 책입니다. 이 책을 쓰신 분이 메시아닉 유대인 랍비입니다. 베리 루빈이라는 레바이께서 이 책을 쓰셨는데요. 저는 이 책을 쓰신 그 레바이를 만나기 위해서 미국 메릴랜드로 찾아갔고 지금 제 앞에 랍비이신 베리 루빈 씨께서 앞에 계십니다. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. You too. You too.
이 메릴랜드에 있는 메시아닉 주이시 콩그리게이션에서 유대인들과 함께 제가 만든 네 번째 영화 루터의 두 얼굴을 같이 봤거든요. 영화를 보신 소감을 얘기를 해주시겠습니까?
When the movie was over, I couldn't say anything. As a Jew, those are my people, and remembering what happened not too long ago, you know, not ancient history but modern history, where Hitler wiped out 6 million Jews and an equal number of non-Jews, and a lot of that was based on what you showed, the teachings of Martin Luther that Hitler used to promote anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, and the destruction of the Jewish people was hard to see, very hard to see. So after the movie was over, I stood to ask my congregation what they thought, and nobody could say a word. I couldn't either. Very powerful movie.
이제 좀 책에 대해서 질문을 하겠습니다. 제가 조금 전에 말씀드렸던 것처럼 책 제목이 굉장히 재밌어요. 당신은 베이글을 가져오셔, 나는 복음을 가져가겠어, 뭐 이런 뜻인데 베이글과 가스펠 어떤 관련이 있습니까?
Bagels are known in America as not exclusively Jewish, but very much identified as a Jewish bread. And the gospel is generally known as a not Jewish idea. So the idea here in the book was you bring the gospel and I'll bring the bagels to have a discussion between Jews and Christians. Jews represented by the bagel and Christians represented by the gospel. And I would like very much for Jews and Christians to be able to talk civilly, calmly about Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah. That's where the title comes from.
그러면 이 책을 쓰시려고 마음 먹게 된 뭐 어떤 큰 계기가 있습니까?
I speak in a lot of churches. And after I talk, a lot of Christians ask me, how do I talk to my Jewish neighbor? How do I talk to my Jewish co-worker? How do I talk to my Jewish relative? And I thought, even though I do seminars on that, I wanted to have something I could give them to explain things quickly. So it's about a 200-page book, very well organized, and it's really based on a training program I did for the largest Jewish missionary organization in the world. And I compiled all my notes into a book so that when somebody says, how do I talk to Jewish people about Jesus? How do I witness to Jews? They can read this book.
이 책이 그러면은 미국에서는 좀 많이 읽혔습니까?
It's been out for 20 or 30 years and it's still, people buy it. It was used as a textbook at a major Christian Bible college in their evangelism class, particularly their Jewish evangelism class.
그 유대인들에게 이방인들이 찾아가서 전도를 할 때 쉽지가 않거든요. 그래서 우리 이방인들이 유대인들을 향해서 전도할 때 복음을 전할 때 좀 조심해야 될 거라든가 미리 좀 알아두면 좋을 게 있으면 좀 어떤 것들인지 얘기를 해 주시겠습니까?
When you're talking to Jewish people about the gospel, there's some very important things to remember. And I'm glad you asked that question. In your film that we just saw, The Two Faces of Luther, all that history of Christian anti-Semitism is very well known to Jewish people. It's just part of our training. 2,000 years, not just since Luther, but 2,000 years of anti-Semitism in the church. So when you're talking to a Jewish person about the head of the church, the leader, Jesus or Yeshua, Jewish people think, well, why do I want to follow what you're saying? Because your leader persecuted Jewish people. Now we know Yeshua did not persecute Jewish people. Yeshua loved his own people. I mean, he died for his own people first, but that's not known to most Jews. Most Jewish people think that Christians are anti-Semites just to begin with, because of this 2,000-year history of anti-Semitism. If you go back to the church fathers in the 1st and 2nd and even the 3rd century, they became anti-Semitic. They were threatened by the Jewish people, and they persecuted the Jewish people. They changed theology a lot because they were replacement from the 3rd century on. Maybe the Nicene Council in the early days of the church, they decided to step away from their Jewish roots. So I describe it as cutting off their roots. Paul uses the expression cutting off their roots. And I think it's exactly what the church did even later. Paul wrote that in Romans, like maybe, 50 or 60 of the Common Era. And then within a few hundred years, the church cut off its Jewish roots. So when you're talking to Jewish people about the Messiah, they figure, why should you talk to me about the Messiah? You don't know anything about your Jewish roots. So you're just talking to me about your religion, Christianity. So Christians need to learn how to talk to Jewish people in a Jewish way about the Jewish Messiah. That's what the book is about.
유대인 중에 이 예수아를 메시아로 받아들인 사람들을 가리켜서 메시아닉 주라고 합니다. 우리는 이제 예수를 믿는 사람들을 크리스천이라고 하고요. 근데 왜 유대인들은 이 예수를 믿어도 크리스천이라고 안 하고 본인들을 메시아닉 주 또는 빌리버 이렇게 표현을 해주기를 원하더라고요. 그 이유는 뭔가요?
The word Christian means a follower of the Christ, but to the Jewish world, Christian means Gentile. Christian means non-Jew. Even though you could say that Matthew and Mark and Peter and Paul were all Christians, they were Jews. And they never called themselves Christians, they called themselves Jews. So for the last 2,000 years, the term Christian has been associated with Nazis, with Spanish Inquisition, all kinds of historical anti-Semitism brought by people who called themselves Christians. So obviously we don't want to identify with those people, nor do we want to have anything to do with those people because they had nothing to do with us. I'm not in the same group. So instead of using the term Christian, which sounds, it's almost synonymous with Gentile, we want to identify as Jews because we're Jews. And we say we're Messianic Jews, not Reformed Jews, not Orthodox Jews, not conservative Jews, not Reconstructionist Jews. Our unique brand of Judaism is Messianic Judaism because we hold to the fact that the Messiah is here and we follow him and we know that his name is Yeshua. There are certain terminology that you want to stay away from. Like we don't use the term Christian, we call ourselves Messianic Jews. We mean the same thing, a follower of Jesus, same thing. But we don't even use the term Jesus because Jesus is the person who Jewish people thought was our enemy for 2,000 years. So we use his Hebrew name, Yeshua. which means salvation. So it's more accurate. And then we don't go to churches because churches could be Lutheran churches, Catholic churches, Mormon churches. So it's a hard concept for Jewish people to get. So we call our places of worship congregations or synagogues or fellowships because the word church is bothersome. It doesn't mean that we're not part of the universal church, but that's a hard concept for people to get. So we just avoid certain terminology. There's a whole chapter in my book about that. I call it semantics and sensitivities.
그리고 레바이께서 쓰신 책에 보면은 우리가 성경책을 이야기할 때 이제 구약 성경과 신약 성경을 영어로 이제 Old Testament 또 New Testament 이렇게 얘기하거든요. 근데 그것보다도 다른 표현을 써야 된다. 이렇게 이야기하셨어요.
Jews don't call the first part of the Bible Old Testament. Plus, it's not much older than the New Testament. We call it the Tanakh, which is the way Jewish people referred to the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the writings, the Psalms, the Proverbs, the writings. So we Jews call that the Tanakh. And so we're going to use our terminology called Tanakh rather than Old Testament. The word New Testament only appears in Jeremiah 31, where it speaks of a new covenant. It's not even the word testament. It's a new covenant that God made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Now, the Christians took that prophecy in Jeremiah 31:31 and said, well, that speaks of this New Testament. And so we see the writing in Paul where he uses the word testament. But it's a foreign word to Jewish people. And it's again making a boundary that doesn't need to be there. It puts a separation that doesn't need to be there. So rather than use that terminology, we use Jewish terminology, Tanakh, which is the Older Testament, and Brit Hadashah, which is the Hebrew way to say New Covenant.
제가 한국의 목사님들을 모시고 이스라엘 가서 메시아닉 유대인들이 예배를 드리는 콩그리게이션에 가서 함께 예배를 드린 적이 있었는데 그때 그 메시아닉 주이시들이 남자들은 이렇게 탈릿을 뒤집어 쓰고 예배 시간에 또 토라를 들고 이렇게 읽고 이런 모습을 보고 한국 목사님들이 굉장히 당황해하면서 왜 우리를 이런 데 데리고 왔느냐 이렇게 항의를 하신 적이 있어요. 그만큼 이방인들이 봤을 때는 메시아닉 유대인들이 예배 드리는 모습이 좀 생소해 보이거든요. 그 방법도 많이 다르고. 어떻습니까? 레바이께서는 지금 메시아닉 유대인들이 예배 드리는 그런 형태, 그런 모습, 이방인들도 그렇게 해야 된다라고 생각하십니까? 아니면 이거는 그냥 유대인들의 예배 방식이고 이방인들은 이방인대로의 방식대로 예배를 드려도 상관없다. 어떻게 생각하십니까?
I don't want to say they should. It is the way Jews traditionally worship. Okay, the Torah, what they held up the Torah, that was initially given to the Jewish people, and we feel responsible to follow the teachings of the Torah. Gentiles are invited to come alongside and participate, but as invited guests, and I think it's fine. In my congregation or my synagogue or my community, we have Jews and Gentiles, and we don't make a big difference between the two, even though we recognize that Jews are Jews and Gentiles are Gentiles, and yet we worship together, and that's what we think God wants.
근데 메시아닉 유대인들은 이제 아무래도 유대인이니까 유대인의 절기가 있지 않습니까? 봄절기, 가을절기에서 유월절도 보내고 초막절도 보내고 또 불임절도 하고 또 이렇게 하는데 절기들을 지키는데 메시아닉 유대인 그 콩그리게이션에서는 부활절과 성탄절은 안 보내십니까?
Well, I think we know that the holiday that Christians observe now is Christmas is not very much about the birth of the Messiah. It's very commercialized. I mean, most Christians would say that it's not about the birth of the Savior, it's about selling gifts and so forth and so on. So it's not something that we relate to. Jews don't relate to it. I mean, I think the music is beautiful. I think Christmas music is beautiful. And the story of the birth of the Messiah is something that I enjoy reading, but I don't think Jewish people, Messianic or otherwise, want to get involved with the trappings, the external things pertaining to Christmas. And Easter, which is really about the resurrection of the Messiah, is often also lost because, you know, we're glad to celebrate the resurrection of the Messiah. He's our Messiah, and the resurrection is very important to us as well. But Easter is often associated with practices that are pagan. They're pagan. They're like having a ham, you know, to celebrate the resurrection of the Jewish Messiah. If you had a ham, he wouldn't be able to come for dinner. You know, he kept kosher. Jesus kept kosher. He wouldn't eat ham. So if you invite Jesus to your Easter dinner, he's not going to show up. So that's what my way of saying that it's foreign to a Jewish mind. The birth of the Messiah is fine. The resurrection of the Messiah is fine. It's all the other stuff that's just not Jewish.
요즘 우리 한국에서도 많은 크리스천들이 유대인들을 향해서 선교의 그런 마음을 갖기 시작을 했습니다. 그런 분들이 많이 생겨나고 있고요. 또 절기에 대해서도 뭐 한우카도 그렇고 패스오버도 그렇고 이런 쪽으로 이렇게 관심이 있고 더 많은 정보를 얻기를 원하는 그런 한국의 크리스천들도 많기 때문에 우리 루빈 라피께서 쓰신 이런 책들이 한국에서 번역돼서 한국의 크리스천들에게 소개가 되면 많은 사람들이 관심을 갖고 읽을 것 같아요. 그래서 제가 욕심을 내서 좀 이 책들을 가져가서 한국에 가서 번역해가지고 한국에서도 출판하고 싶은데 우리 라피께서 좀 한국 크리스천들에게 우리 브래드TV 시청자들에게 이 책을 읽을 때 어떤 점을 좀 유의해서 읽었으면 좋겠다. 이런 부분 있으면 말씀 좀 해주시죠.
I think it's very important for Christians to understand. I wrote that book for Christians who know Jewish people. So if they know Jewish people in Korea, great. I don't know how many Jews there are in Korea. So I don't know who they're going to talk to. But I know a lot of Koreans go to Israel, where there are many, many Jewish people. So I think talking to the Jewish people in Israel is important. And I would say the first thing is to remember that the Jews are the chosen people. And the Israelis know that. And they're trying to survive against huge odds of people trying to destroy them because they believe that God chose them. So you have to talk to Jewish people with humility, because unlike the past 2,000 years where Christians have been arrogant toward the Jews, and Paul spoke about that in Romans 11, do not be arrogant towards the Jews. Christians need to be humble and remember that the Jews are the older brothers, and with respect, humility and respect. That's important throughout that book to understand that relationship. Also, it's important that Jewish people recognize that a Christian talking to Jewish people recognize that in the mind of a Jewish person, Christianity is not that far removed from Nazism, because Christians persecuted Jewish people in the name of Christ, just like Nazis did. And although I know that Christians and Nazis are two different people, in the mind of a Jewish person, a lot of persecution against Jews took place at the hand of so-called Christians. So it's important to remember that there has to be a distinction made between what a true Christian is and what a nominal Christian is. Because I'll tell you, a lot of the people that worked in the concentration camps went to church on Sunday. They went to church on Sunday. They were good Christians. And then the rest of the week, they burned Jews in ovens. That's hard to explain. So it has to be explained very sensitively, as your film does.
한국에도 한번 오셔야죠.
Oh, yes. I'd love to. I would love to. When I went to Japan about 6 months ago, and I spoke in a number of churches there, I was also looking for publishers in East Asia. And I found out that the Japanese Christians are smaller in number than the Korean Christians, that there are many, many more Korean Christians than Japanese Christians. So I thought, well, my next trip has to be to Korea, and I can teach in churches there too. And if we can work something out, I'd love for you to publish a lot of our books in Korean. We look for publishers in other countries.
나라마다 민족마다 뭐 살아가는 방식이 다 다르고 또 생각과 개념의 차이가 있죠. 한국 사람들도 그렇고 또 유대인들도 그렇습니다. 특히 유대인들은 기독교인들에 대한 여러 가지 가슴 아픈 역사적 그 사실 때문에 또 바라보는 시각이 다를 수도 있죠. 그렇기 때문에 우리가 이 기독교인으로서 유대인들을 향해서 전도하고 선교할 때 피차 서로 미리 알아야 될 여러 가지 상황들이 있을 겁니다. 그런 것들을 아주 자세하게 잘 써놓은 책이 우리 이 레바이 루빈 씨께서 쓰신 이 책인 것 같습니다. 이 책을 제가 한국에 가져가서 전문가한테 또 맡겨서 번역도 해서 한국의 크리스천들에게 좀 소개를 하고 싶습니다. 그 책이 나올 때쯤이면 가능하시다면 우리 레바이 루빈 씨께서도 한국을 방문해서 또 여러분들과 함께 만나는 시간을 저희 브래드TV가 마련해 보도록 하겠습니다. 나중에 한국에서 만나기를 또 기대하고요. 오늘 인터뷰해 주셔서 고맙습니다. 감사합니다. Thank you very much.